Lies of P was easily one of the best games inspired by the Souls series. It wasn't just hard, it also featured an aesthetic that genuinely stood out. I mean, retelling Pinocchio as a grim adventure against rogue robots in an unforgiving world is certainly an intriguing overview. Even if I thought the original had plenty of room to improve, I was excited to see where the teaser at the end went. While Lies of P Overture does not explore that concept, I was excited to return to the world of Krat. With new bosses, challenges, and story to uncover, is this DLC a must, or is there a reason it was shadow dropped? Normally, I try to avoid spoilers when doing these reviews. I'll purposely choose vague writing or opt for a video that I think is close enough. If that isn't possible, I'll either redact the scene or edit the video in a way where I think the spoiler is not present. However, I think that's extremely difficult with Lies of P Overture. On a basic level, the story is a prequel, which expands on the final scenes of the main narrative, with a number of interactions being spoilers of some kind. Even the bosses contain notable names or offer potential reveals that may piss some players off. All of this, coupled with the DLC being roughly 6 hours long, means my options are either to limit myself to the first boss section and select transversal sections, or include some things that might push the limit. Unfortunately, I don't think that selection of stages lends itself to the video review format, and have chosen to include some of those spoilers. Now, just to be clear, I will not reveal the main story end, the final DLC boss, anything from the expansion's ending, or anything of the like. What will be included are things like a familiar face appearing, and bosses that have some level of relevance to the adventure. If this is not acceptable, then I fully understand and suggest leaving. Otherwise, the review will continue in a couple of seconds. As previously mentioned, Lies of P Overture expands on one of the scenes prior to the main story's ending. It adds some interesting lore, though I would classify the narrative as largely unnecessary. Not that it's bad, it just isn't something where I beat it and was like, this changes everything. Maybe it would be more impactful if I had time to re-experience the entire story, but I'd much rather see the series push for the future instead of expanding on the past. Regardless, the story has enough meat to be interesting, and if nothing else, the climax really was impactful and worth the journey. There's also a really touching optional scene at the very end that expands on one of the random scenes in the story. I know it's very vague to say, but it has a lot going on besides just a random story of the past.
So who is this handsome guest standing before me? It matters not. You belong to me now. You're not the puppet I was expecting.
Before getting into difficulty, I wanted to start by expressing my disappointment in the lack of a refresher course. It's something to think about a lot when it comes to DLC like this, and it really stood out as I got a lone pop-up telling me how to run. When I saw that, I was hopeful it would re-explain the parry system and a few key elements, but alas, that was not the case. This is especially bad in Lies of P due to how demanding the difficulty actually is. Right off the bat, I wanted to mention Nia was confirmed in the director's letter video that some changes are coming in the future. This video went up a few hours prior to me writing this review, so all that is known is something will change in the future. I'll also admit, I have mixed feelings about the difficulty itself. On one hand, I'm usually with the difficulty people, but in Overture's case, I think there's a lot of design that needs work. One of the best examples of what I mean is the shielded mini-boss you encounter at the halfway point. The area it spawns in is rather small, complete with various sections missing a guardrail. On one attempt I got pushed back and fell over the edge. Not the most satisfying way to lose a fight. On the next attempt I was going to do more kiting, though its overall size made moving on the scaffolding very difficult, to the point where I ultimately got boxed into a corner and lost again. Now, I'm sure there's a different weapon that makes this fight easier, but it really feels like the options are parry everything or utilize cheesy tactics like using the ladder to make it retreat. In the ice area, there's another mini-boss that has an even smaller area with just as many places to fall over the edge. At times, it really feels like the only option is to utilize mastery of the mechanics, avoid the fight, or get cheesy. I just don't think these options are conducive to a good gameplay experience. Like, simply closing off more paths or making the arena bigger would go far to make the experience more engaging. Another interesting choice Overture makes is how specific enemies function. Dodging is usually a good way to create distance, heal, or get ready for a counterattack. However, a good number of enemies will close that distance in an instant with seemingly unrelenting attacks. Arguably, the hardest boss is the worst offender of this. At most, I could counterattack him and get in a single blow before he's back on the offensive. He also has moves that can close seemingly any gap in an instant. And not only do these situations suck, there are certain elements that just make it feel unrewarding. For example, once you remove a third of his health, he will go immune and heal. This is usually when I got his health bar to white, but due to the animation I could no longer stagger him. All these arguably whiny complaints aside, I feel like these design choices ensure the lower difficulties retain the core experience. I'm not entirely sure you can beat this boss without some mastery of the parry system. Based off my test, you can tank roughly twice as many hits, but it's irrelevant if you can't consistently mount a counter attack. To me, this is a good compromise, but I digress. This is something that people are going to have a lot of different opinions on, and is probably better left for its own video. The last thing I wanted to touch on is the camera. Certain encounters, like the Guardian boss, are hard due to the design itself. Since you can only lock onto his two weak points, his hand and his head, it's harder to hit him in any other spot. Due to his size and the overall range of his attacks, it's surprisingly easy to take damage as well. It makes a fight that's already hard and increases the difficulty in a way that's rather annoying. Outside of combat is a rather small handful of optional quests. Overall, I'd say these are rather weak. Most of these should be completed through natural progression. The only real exception are things down non-essential paths. Like you might miss the chance to talk to someone because they're down a different hallway, or the door part is another path, but overall it just doesn't add much. The most fun optional tasks were the bow minigames, though even those can be frustrating due to how the controls work. One nice thing is Overture adds a few new weapons. The most notable is the bow, but there is also a really powerful sword and a gunblade, plus a small handful of other weapons. For the most part, I wouldn't say they break the main game by being outright better, just a number of new ways to approach old situations. Though, I imagine the bow will make a number of bosses on later new game runs significantly easier. I don't think Overture is a bad DLC. It tells a story I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in, and some of my complaints I had are holdovers from the main adventure. The only real question is difficulty. For the most part, I genuinely believe it's in a good place. It just suffers from a few sections that stand out in a very annoying way. At least, I don't enjoy encounters where I have to engage with multiple foes and lose because their attacks sink in such a way where it ends in an instant. Likewise, I really don't like the tiny arenas that have many places where you can lose in an instant. It's one thing to push the parry system, and another to essentially dictate every action. It's something that's very divisive, and I'll be curious to see how things change in the future. It is certainly a delicate balance, as decreasing the damage is no different than simply lowering the difficulty. And if some of the enemies lose their aggression, there is the real possibility to just steamroll lower difficulties. Anyway, enjoyment comes down to what you like about Liza P. If it was the intense combat that essentially required mastering the parry system, you'll likely love the expansion. But if you thought the base game was hard, I'd suggest waiting for the upcoming difficulty changes. It might not fix everything, but any improvement is better than none. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, and for more content, please subscribe.